Welcome to our very professional stream. Hi.
We're all professionals here.
Yes, professionals. That's why I'm not doing this in my PJs at all.
I'm going to mute myself now.
I am.
Yeah, I know I'm not the only one. And I know you are watching are probably in your PJs too. But if you've managed to set up a system where you have day PJs and night PJs, you're one ahead of me. So I hope the pandemic is treating everybody well, or at least not terribly. Toronto is about to go back into a fairly strict lockdown, which, of course, as somebody who never really left lockdown, I've allowed 2 people within 6 feet of me without a mask in the last 8 months, and one of them is my roommate. So to me, it doesn't matter that the casinos are closing. But let's dig into it. First up, thank you so much for joining. This is, of course, the stream where we read and critically evaluate Al-Qadim, Arabian Adventures, a D&D supplement from 92, a setting, which we have been finding to be slightly problematic, I think. And the commentary, we've got lots of great people here to do the commentary, but first I just want to give you a heads up that a new episode of Asians Represent, the podcast, has dropped on Wuxia, and it's about sort of the genre, and I'm sure people have seen, martial arts movies, but that is a small snippet that what we've kind of gotten access to in the West of what the sort of the richness of that genre is, and this episode really gets into it. It's fantastic. So I strongly recommend you have a read through that. And now we'll turn to our wonderful panelists. We'll do some quick introductions here. My name is Ammar, he, him. I'm one of the co-hosts of Asians Represent, and I'm one of the cast members in our D&D, no longer D&D, our live actual play set in a sort of setting inspired by a sort of a fantasy version of China called Dungeons and Asians, which is a lot of fun, and you might enjoy that as well. And I'll turn it over to Mariam.
Okay, hey, it's hi everybody. I am Mariam, and you can find me on Twitter at media_junkie, and I do quite a few things, but namely I am a co-caretaker of Utopia, where next week is going to be our season finale. I always get confused between series and season finale of Kahania, which is a program that I am the guide for, and also I will be partaking in FCRD, otherwise known as Fuck Cancer Roll Dice event next week from November 26th to the 29th. I will be running a game of Dialect, and I will also be participating as a player in a game of Quest. And you can follow my Twitter for all that information.
Okay, Ahmed, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Hi, I'm Ahmed Al-Jabri. You'll find me on Twitter at Mr_Al-Jabri. I run a community for Arabs, D&D players, and other tabletop RPGs. And I translate, I do cultural consulting, and I spread tidbits about Arabic culture on the internet.
It's some really great stuff. You should follow him on Twitter. Izza, please.
Hi, I'm Izza. I go by Evil Clever Dog on Twitter and Instagram, and also now on YouTube. You can find me at youtube.com/evilcleverdog. I'm a cosplayer, and in the before times, I was a set and costume designer for theatre and film. So now I'm kind of like trying to move that stuff over to YouTube, see what I can do there. But I'll talk about that more at the end. And I also do various like TTRPG streams, and yeah, that's me. Looking forward to finally getting through this section of the book today, hopefully.
Yeah. Adam Ali, please tell us about yourself.
Hi, my name is Adam Ali. Some people may know me as Werewolf Feels on the interwebs. I'm a TTRPG streamer, writer, lover, community organizer, and more. You can find more information on that Twitter I just told you about. The other big thing that is coming up, because Mariam mentioned Fuck Cancer Roll Dice, I will actually be joining in on a game of Quest with Mariam. So if you're not done with us yet, next weekend, Sunday, see us there. I'm also working on several other projects with everyone else in here, basically, because let's face it, I love these people. I'm also excited to get rid of this book, like get through this section. Please, I want these themes to be over with.
I'm sure we'll have lots more to say about the rest of the book too once we get through the sort of setting primer.
Yes, I'm looking forward to it.
Please.
Right, hey, I'm Emraz, pretty much everywhere on the internet at Emraz. I'm using they, she pronouns. That's about it for me right now. Don't got anything major. If you want to come to my Twitter, I occasionally talk about tabletop stuff and sometimes talk about math. I was pulled out of my math absence recently to talk about number bases, different counting systems that wrap around the different numbers. Like we use base 10 normally, and what the implication of using different number bases in your TTRPG world building or general fiction writing are, and tips and tricks for doing so. Yeah, okay, that sounds like random math history and world building that you want to learn about, like the fact that some countries and cultures used to use base 12 number systems because you could count to 12 with knuckle bones and one finger instead of using 10 fingers. Yep. Exactly like Ammar just demonstrated, and other such stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm actually sort of a wide-ranging turbo nerd, and so that's actually one of the things I'm interested in. And fun fact, the reason why we have our base, like the way we do the clock, the time, is because that's descended from a base 12 system. And the reason why it's 60 is actually you can then count on two hands up to 60. You just do 12 on one hand, and you put up one finger, and then if you do 5 of them, that's 5 times 12 is 60.
And Sumerians also had the entire system with 60 different symbols for numbers.
Oh wow!
For base 60, they use the full base 60. They use the full base 60 system, and there's a lot of different theories about how that came to be. Some, like one of the theories is there was a group that used base 12 and a group that used base 5, and they combined them. One of the theories is just they developed that from scratch.
Very interesting. I'm gonna have to look that up because I'm a particular kind of nerd. But I will also say that you always have very interesting things to say about game mechanics, and you just sort of have an eye for that I find very interesting and you know, probably partly because I'm working on my own game, and so that's super interesting. And your takes on those is just always fascinating. So definitely follow them as well. I think Isa has kindly agreed to do the content warning. So just as a heads up, we do cover some fairly heavy topics, and so feel free to take a break whenever you need to. We have sort of something like safety tools on our side as well. We check in with each other before and after the stream, and we're also going to call for a short break about an hour into the stream. Just, you can get a drink as well, or just take a moment or a breather. Is that please?
Yeah, so the Nightbot has the content warnings down in the chat, but we just want to say them out loud for the purposes of you all hearing them. So today we want to put up content warnings for Islamophobia, sexism, and honor killings, in particular, those topics. So yeah, if you feel like that's something you might want to be a bit cautious of, then you can take a break, come back later, and there will be a VOD on the Asians Represent YouTube channel, so you can catch up if you feel like that's something you want to tackle in a more like controlled environment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And
also,
sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, also, generally ahead, I mean, it's sort of general content which we're tackling, but racism, both intentional and otherwise, is likely to come up during the discussion.
Yeah.
That's sort of assumed, but it doesn't hurt to say.
Yeah. Definitely. Thank you for the note. I guess like it's a bit like, the fish that lives in water, so it doesn't see water, doesn't understand it. It's like this whole thing is definitely coming from a problematic place. But thank you for noting that, even though we sort of walk into it thinking that. In terms of general approach, for myself, I often come at this through the lens of Edward Said's seminal work, Orientalism. And I try to be as sort of capital C charitable to the work that I can, or at least to the producers of such work, because often they're not bad people. They're just kind of sort of trapped within kind of hollowed mirrors they can't really see outside of. And so whenever they try to relate to other cultures, they relate to them in the terms of their own culture and their own perspective. And to that, I also want to give a shout out to people who have played or even enjoyed Oriental Adventures. And I want to read a tweet that one of my sort of fellow performers on Dungeons & Asians, I think, put it so well. They were talking about the Oriental Adventures critical read that they did. So just sub out Al-Qadim there, but Oriental Adventures, or Al-Qadim, is bad. It has a lot of problems and reinforces harmful stereotypes. But just because I can connect the text to real world racism, it doesn't mean that if you enjoy these books, you are a racist. It means you have a capacity to support Asian stories. And that's what we're going to try to do here too, is provide perspectives on how different pieces of this could be made better. Or perhaps you could even try, if you wanted to run this, how you could tweak things a little bit, as I know Emma is going to be running Al-Qadim, which is going to be super interesting and I hear more about too. Anybody else want to jump in with general notes about their approach?
That's a good question. Sorry, my brain stopped working for a split second. Well, when it comes to this work and many other works, one, I want to figure out how playable is it, right? Just as a game, does this work as a game? Because truth be told, a lot of very Orientalist games often don't. Sometimes they focus so hard on the textbook introduction to whatever world they've created or have cribbed off from that they don't actually put a game in there. And so far, honestly, that is a bit of what we've seen from Al-Qadim, where the front half of the text has been very, not front half, the first chapter of the text has been very, very not playable. But I'm looking forward to seeing the rest. That's why I'm so excited to see the second chapter. Y'all have no idea. I'm kind of jumping up and down. And the other thing I tend to view it from is, okay, this book is a product of its time. Does that excuse it? Does it not? Sometimes it does. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes there were options available to them and they didn't look. You know, sometimes they really had no other options. So those are my two really, really pull points. Sure, it's a book of its time. Does that matter in this case? And two, is it playable? And so far, this is a book of its time. And so far, I've not found anything playable for those who are keeping track.
It's been a bit rough going.
Yeah, I was gonna add real quick as well, because like on Aramali saying like the first half of the book, and no shade on Aramali, but I think it's also worth keeping in mind that we've spent 6 months, and or today this will be 6 months on the first 10 pages, which is not going to be most people's experience reading this. I hope. I hope you're not spending 6 months reading just the intros of Al-Qadim. You have much better things you can do with your time. But I think that's important for two things. One, because it's important to emphasize that this is the first thing in the book, right? And we've talked about the implications of that before on the other episodes. I'm not going to fully rehash that, but it is the first impression. But it's also, it feels like we've been going through a lot of this. We've been going through at a rate of like 1 page at a time when there's still the vast majority of the book left. Which is hard to keep in perspective as we are deep in, say, talking about honor killings, for example.
Yeah.
When that feels like all there is. Does that excuse the fact that it's there? Not at all. That's just worth sort of keeping in mind for perspective that hopefully, eventually, we will get to an actual game.
Yeah.
Probably.
Maybe. I think it's also important to say that, because I think a common criticism of podcasts along these lines is often, if you don't enjoy it, don't play it. And the fact is that while we might not choose to play Al-Qadim necessarily, all of us, we all are people who enjoy and love TTRPGs, whether that's D&D or other games or both. And that is the reason why we are here critiquing this, because it's something we enjoy and it's something we therefore want to be more inclusive of people like us and other people watching the stream, because in the past it hasn't been.
Certainly, and that's a very good point where definitely people sort of misunderstand sort of a request for creating a space for other people to join with a criticism of the whole thing or wanting to destroy it or things like that. So thank you very much for underlining that. Shall we get into it? Are we all ready? Everybody brought their spoons? Okay. So
I brought a teeny tiny hammer. Does that count?
I brought needles.
I don't have anything exciting to reach for nearby.
Ready to burn this fucker down.
All right.
There you go. There we go. This little guy is gonna give me emotional support. It's my emotional support mannequin. Okay. So yeah, sorry. So shall we have? Isa, would you like to take up the first part of the reading? Because we had just gotten to...
Sure. The Bond of Salt, yeah?
That's right.
Yeah.
Cool. So, the Bond of Salt. The Salt Bond epitomizes Sakharan hospitality and the mutual responsibilities of host and guest. When a guest ingests salt from a host table, their bond becomes formal. Presumably, the salt remains in the guest's body for 3 days. Until those 3 days elapse, the host is responsible for the guest's welfare. By offering the salt, the host vows to protect the guest from harm for the duration of the salt bond. The guest has his or her own obligations. By accepting the salt, a guest agrees not to bring harm to the host. Furthermore, a polite guest should leave with the coming of dawn if the family's stores appear to be lean. If the family protests heartily, the guest may stay for the entire duration of the salt bond. No matter what the host may proclaim, however, it is impolite for a guest to remain in another's house for more than 3 days. Thereafter, the welcome is gone, no matter how much salt is consumed. Furthermore, a guest knows it is impolite to ask for hospitality of any kind. He or she must wait for the host to offer it. Since it is the host's duty to do so, and it is an insult not to accept, a guest is rarely disappointed. The rules of hospitality come to light in Shahrazad's famous tale, Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves. The poor woodcutter Ali Baba discovers a treasure trove in a magical cave, which belongs to a band of robbers. Ali Baba takes some of the treasure, which is clearly centuries old. The robber captain discovers Ali Baba's identity and vows to kill the daring woodcutter, but not before Ali Baba is severely punished. In the guise of a merchant, the robber goes to Ali Baba's modest home. The kindly woodcutter fails to recognize the robber and graciously offers a meal. The merchant does not wish to accept. He claims to have special dietary needs. When Ali Baba insists, proclaiming that anything can be prepared, the robber feigns embarrassment and says that he can eat no salt. Even this unscrupulous man, a thief and a murderer, will not violate the laws of hospitality. If he were to consume Ali Baba's salt, he would feel honor bound not to harm the woodcutter or his family. Ali Baba serves his guest unsalted meat. The robber chews the fare and he schemes, imagining how he will humiliate and destroy his gracious host when the meal is done. Before his plan can take effect, a clever servant girl enters the room. She dances magnificently, bending to and fro while brandishing a scimitar. For the finale, she plunges the blade into the chest of the surprised robber. The robber is dead, Ali Baba is mortified. He believes he must kill the girl as retribution because the merchant was his guest. The girl hastily reveals the merchant's true identity and explains how the robber purposely avoided the bond of salt so that he was not really a guest after all. Everyone lives happily ever after, brackets, except the robber, of course. In another well-known yam, a thief is pillaging a home when he comes across a small box. Inside it is another little box which contains a fine white powder. Thinking it's sugar, the thief touches it to his lips. To his horror, he discovers that it is salt. Immediately, he leaves the house taking nothing. Like the robber in the tale of Ali Baba, he is willing to steal, yet he cannot bring himself to violate the bond of salt, even if the bond was forged by accident. To most Saharans, actual salt is not required for the bond of hospitality. Even guests who merely drink water or unsalted coffee can expect no harm from an honorable host.
Okay, first of all, I just want to say that I love the in brackets except the robber, of course.
That is,
I think
that's
that's
probably one of the first, like, unironically just good pieces of writing.
Yeah, that was genuinely funny. Thank you.
That was a good joke.
So, like, I just read the section, I just want to say that they just did the thing again where they render the entire section we just read pointless by saying it doesn't actually work the way they just spent several paragraphs describing it does, like, which they do every time.
I was going to be like, I don't think not eating salt is what makes hospitality matter.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, moral of the tale is get assaulted with hospitality.
Yeah.
Oh,
great. Also,
I will say, if you're serving food without salt, you're probably not being hospitable in most cases.
Yeah,
true. Yeah, please season your food.
That is a sign. Like,
this isn't the Jordan Peterson diet.
Someone either has like a serious dietary issue, in which case, acceptable, or you're actively saying to your guests, please leave.
Yeah.
I will say the second one is probably even more interesting, because who would look at a box of fine white powder and think,
I'm just gonna gun that.
It's sugar. It's sugar.
Like, mate, if you're making a drug comment, just make a drug comment, okay? We're all adults.
I mean, listen, I really I have a really big sweet tooth. I love sugar. I love honey.
Spice.
I'm not gonna break into someone's house to steal their sugar. Like,
what if you really want to bake a cake? Okay, sorry. So I wanted to talk about the initial Alibaba story to begin with, because even though there's more in front of it and more after it, I think this is where they got the idea from, because it's a weird thing to focus on. In the original Alibaba and the 40 Thieves, the story happens somewhat similarly without the whole things that you can tell they added, like even the robber would feel honor bound not to harm the woodcutter for the salt. That's not in the original story. What's in the original story is that the man is dressed up, because he's a robber, obviously. He's dressed up as a merchant. He spends all this time befriending Alibaba's son, and Alibaba's like, he wants to get to know Alibaba's son so he can get invited to the house so he can case the place out. Roughly is what I got from it. And then he does get invited, but oh no, Alibaba's there. What if he recognizes it? So he tries to get out, you know, and it's like making these excuses. I don't want to stay. I can't eat salt. I feel so weird about sitting at your table and make you cook things without salt. I can't stay. And Alibaba, being the kind man that he is, indeed graciously invites him in, because he doesn't see through the disguise. And so it's a bit of a pantomime as the servant girl, or as it's written in the original translation, slave girl, like dances around, delaying time, bringing dishes that do not contain salt, wondering who the heck is this man. And the moment she sees him, she recognizes him and yes, murders him. So all this little addition about feeling honor bound and stuff, that's not in the original tale. Because the reason why he needs to get out is so he can come back and murder Alibaba later, but not have his merchant persona associated with a murder.
And there's another important detail where he smuggles his old crew in crates, and as part of the dance, she basically stabs those crates, killing his reinforcement.
Basically, she's the hero, yet the story is named after Alibaba.
Yeah. She also, like, before even this final plot, she foils like 3 or 4 other schemes to kill Alibaba.
Oh,
there's something to do with like going around door to door as well, and like she figures out that they
so like they were a thing where they marked the door of Alibaba's house so that they could come at night and find the door that was marked to kill Alibaba, and she would like mark every single house or clear out the marks so that they wouldn't know which one.
And then they chip, like they have someone fall in front of his house and chip a door frame. So she goes around chipping every single person's door frame in the entire neighborhood.
She foils like 4 different schemes.
Give this girl a raise, damn it.
Yeah, she's like really smart and really cool and really undersold in that story. It's also important to mention that Alibaba is one of the stories not in the original Arabic. It was added by a French translator who heard it from a Maronite storyteller, or at least that's what he claimed. The Maronite storyteller does indeed have a manuscript containing some of these stories, including Aladdin, or at least a version of it. So, like, again, we're already drawing thin ice, and this is what happens when you don't go beyond surface level stuff. They took the translation book. They never looked at the Arabic in all likelihood, probably because the Arabic is hard to find. I'm not saying that this is bad. Overall, I don't really think this is too bad, especially compared to what we've read so far. But going to the source material, it seems a weird thing to focus on, this salt thing. It's like an odd choice rather than rather than just having hospitality in general.
Yeah, I think it's meant to sort of exotify again, right? It's the same kind of thing. It's like every culture has a concept of honor and how you save face in front of other people and how you fit into society. But this is different. This is so different. If you have like 1 grain of salt at their table, they're honor bound for 3 days or something to host you. It's like, well, that's a way to run a hotel economy. I guess.
Like there's like this weird sort of over focus on precise details of like who's really gonna like say, oh, it's been 3 days, get out of my house. Like it's taking the idea of hospitality, which is something that exists in some form in every single culture, but when we're talking about brown people, we take it to this like weird extreme where everyone is like a zealot about it, and I can't help but think that there's racist and exotifying connotations in that.
I have to get in this because we are really zealot about this. Really zealot. And like these stories, like for the 3 days, if somebody is a guest at your place and they stayed for more than 3 days, you don't go tell them please leave. Your neighbors would intervene and say, okay, you need to stay for more than 3 days. Come over to my place. You have overburdened this person.
Yeah.
And if you are going across some village or some Bedouin tent or something, they are going to host you. You're not gonna, oh, can I stay the night here? No, they saw you. You're welcome. You're staying the night here. We are overzealous about this. This is no denying.
So what I'm saying is you couch surf every 3. What I'm hearing is you couch surf every 3
Basically,
days.
Yeah.
But the truth is, nobody misuses it. It's an honorable thing, and at the same time, you don't want. It's not an honorable thing to be a burden to other people. So it's not something that you would put yourself in such positions.
Yeah.
For the salt, I like it because we do have something similar to the Western concept of breaking bread. We say bread and salt. So it's an honorable thing. Like if you eat something with someone, your relationship is more than just acquaintances. So was it necessary to put it there as a mechanical, somewhat cultural mechanical thing? Maybe not, but I like that they put something related to our culture. I feel that they were inspired by something and try to make it a cultural thing in Zahara.
I somewhat agree. Like, I do think the overall hospitality stuff is okay, and I do think that the Bond of Salt specifically, like calling it the Bond of Salt, I have no problem with. I do think it's a weird focus to take from the original story, but I'm saying that as a person who gets inspired by stuff all the time, right? It's a totally personal thing. Where I have issue is when they start specifying that these villains themselves are freaking out because it's specifically salt, as opposed to, oh no, I'm staying at this person's house for a while. How can I rob them? Right? It adds a sort of weird texture, because then it's not really about hospitality. It's about there's sort of transaction.
Yeah, that was more what I meant, rather than like. It's the fact that the emphasis seems to be on this is how like we trick people, or how we trick villains into not. Yeah, it's the overemphasis on that part of the story specifically. That I find to be where it becomes like a little bit very like extreme.
I say this from experience, but I feel like sometimes these really sort of like over detailed little plot hooks that are thrown in lore is there for players to come up with creative ways of using these in their adventures. And by creative, I mean Looney Tunes creative.
Oh, someone showed up with salted coffee, didn't they? They're like, no, it's okay. You can just sit down for coffee. Pour some sugar. Oh, it was salt, I guess, but you've already drunk it, so now.
So now we got a bargain, you know, where you're in my house. You had my salt. Now you gotta be. You can't kill me.
Makes it a bit harder to be a
there
murderer,
is
though.
there is an extreme honor bound to some aspects in our life that even the worst of the worst has to stick with it. And this is something in other cultures as well. What I see from the salt bond is that, okay, if I know you, we're acquaintances living in the city, you come over to my place, there's no expectations of any issues. But if you invite a stranger to your house, it's become a customary thing and a customary expectance that you will eat salt, and by that you create the bond. So if you're traveling and you go to somebody's place and say, no, I won't be eating salt, it's kind of like a weird thing at such situation. But if you're in a city and somebody meets you, an old friend to come over, have dinner, and you tell them I can't eat salt, nobody's gonna think twice. But it's more of a situation specific thing. And that's how they kind of, they failed to clarify it in the last sentence.
Yeah. I definitely agree with that sentiment. I think overall, like if I was to redo Zahara, and we do this theoretical thing all the time for those new to the stream, because I know there's some of you this time around, where we say, if we had to redo Zahara, what would we change about this? And I say, I think I'd keep it. I would rephrase it, retexture it, but I do like the idea that it is a form of hospitality that is called this bond of salt. No one actually expects you to just eat a teaspoon of salt when you enter the house, but it's known that it's there.
Here, just open up.
Here's an idea. If you visit some a high status person, expected that they give each of the guests a biscuit with a salt biscuit.
Yeah.
Like this is customary, kind of by coming to our house and eating this biscuit, part of the appetizers. So if somebody doesn't eat it, this is the people gonna start being suspicious.
And that also
I am here to kill you. I shall not eat this. Stab.
Yeah, but that allows the fun role play where you can say, you know, you're invited to this very rich woman's house, and you'll notice that everything is extremely bland. There's no salt in any of this food, and then you can just leave the players with wondering what the hell that means.
Okay, so I think I'm like starting to formulate my overall issue with this, and like fully agreeing with most of what Ahmed said. And like we've talked about hospitality before, and that being a thing that is important to all of us, and reiterating as well the sort of point of like specific emphasis on details in an attempt to orientalize and exotify rather than make more powerful or meaningful. But I think specifically also what like kind of feels off to me about this section is that it kind of misunderstands the concept and purpose of ritual. So when we're talking about the salt biscuit one, that is a really ritualistic practice, right? If you were saying specifically, the ritual is this exchange of salt biscuit, that is a thing that is then done in as a sort of tradition, a practice. It is a codified exchange that is symbolic of a hospitality and mutual agreement. The weird specific emphasis on just salt versus sort of seems to kind of miss what the point of ritual is. It focuses on this detail that they see as important rather than, say, creating a interesting piece of world building to me, it feels like the very concept of like, oh, not having, and even still like, because to me, like not having salt on your food could be like a dietary restriction, and even they acknowledge that at the end, like most people don't see that actual salt is necessary for the bond. And I would play up perhaps a bit more about that, and about like it's not necessarily the salt in the bond of salt that is important, but rather that sort of mutual acceptance of a gift, right? Like the salt biscuit is the traditional, and hence why it's called the bond of salt. But if you accept coffee, if you accept water, if you accept something from the host, you were engaging in this contract, right? Because that's the core idea here. I think that would make it a lot more potent as a piece of world building to me. It reflects a bit more on the culture and creates a world that is a bit more believable on how ritual arises.
Yeah.
It's not that dissimilar from, like, you know, when you enter someone's house, you're immediately offered water or something, or you're asked to sit. Or basically, if you're like, you know, there's a cold welcome, or they don't want you here if they haven't even asked you to sit down. It's like, no, keep standing. It's okay. You know, and those sort of things. So, like Ammar said, it's this contract that the whole thing kind of hinges on.
Sorry, the chat.
The chat is making me lose my mind right now.
Apologize. No, I yeah.
Okay.
Right.
I do want to call up Ed Fortune's comment, who needs the friends cantrip when you have salt?
You don't. I also would like to support the Bad Wobbler for saying that their bard has a slingshot of salt pellets and shoots them into people's mouths to get them to stop killing them. A bard would do that in D&D. You're right. Congratulations. Yeah. I do. So I think I want to kind of wrap us up with, I think the real problem might be the second story, where the white powder is mistaken for sugar. Someone decides to eat it and turns out it's salt, and then he has a freak out. Because realistically, if it's about the ritual of eating something, they shouldn't be eating anything at all. Like, they see a box of white powder, they should lightly close it and go and steal something else. That would have been the thing realistic, I guess, robbers would do, even with this bond of salt thing. But instead we have this to reinforce that, and then immediately have a paragraph afterwards saying, hey, it's not really about the salt. Yeah. Overall, what it indicates is that the writing here probably needed an extra pass or two to make it a bit more clear. Mate, let me finish before I start laughing again. And overall, this is like all of us. I think every single one of us at one point has said, you know what? There is a version of this that just exists. You know, whether it's forcing someone to walk inside your door instead of, you know, leaving them outside the lintel, or forcing them to sit down, or offering them water, or even literal salt. There are versions of this that exist, and I'm okay with talking about it and making it a feature of the setting. I just need it written better.
Yeah, I find particularly the last story just, like, to me, it just goes into the realm of ridiculousness that we mentioned last time about, like, you know, if a traveling group arrive at an oasis and they see that there's other people there and their supplies are low, they'll leave the oasis because they can't offer anyone any food, even though they might die of dehydration. And it's just like, do we really need to take it to like that level of a extreme that really, if a person was in that situation, they probably wouldn't do that in the real world? It just, yeah.
Yeah, it's also important to remember who this book is talking to, because it's not talking to people from these cultures who will look at this and say, okay, that may be a bit much, but yeah, they're looking to people who don't, yeah.
Yeah, and like to go back to my point about, like, if you emphasize it more on the ritual, it removes you ever from falling into the trap of writing the second story. Because, like, I think to me, what the bond of salt here is about is it's about that mutual exchange, right? If you break into someone's house and eat their salt or eat their food, that's not the same as them offering you food and taking it, right? Because that's the core concept here. The bond of salt is you being offered the salt. So like that feels like it weakens the bond.
Yeah, I don't see why a criminal would care. Yeah. Literally, I don't see why a criminal breaking into someone's house would care that they accidentally ate salt, which is a weird thing to do, but like, yeah, whatever.
No one sees them do it.
As a Muslim, I know people who would freak out if you, not them, you accidentally ate pork.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I understand your points. However, most of these things, when it comes to world building, it's not expected to be as a rule of thumb in every situation. Most of these things, okay, if you want to use this as an extra flavor, as an expectation during the setting. What I do understand, this is what some people believe, this is the core rule about the hospitality. As long as this is the point, everything else doesn't matter. You can deceive, but you don't kill your guest, you don't kill your host. But where is the key on that is the salt. So for most average people, they don't think about it because it's not something they expect to be killed or be betrayed or something like that. So this is the intention, what I read from it. It's true, they failed to write it in a better way, but the idea is still there. It's not everything that is mentioned is supposed to be applied in every situation every time. It's just an overall theme that is expected for you to use it in situations that feels appropriate to it. And if it can be used as a plot twist, a plot key, or however you need it for your story. So it's not expected to be all the time. Every time you go there, they're going to give you a biscuit, but it's an added flavor.
I mean, on that point,
sorry.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say that on that point, I'm actually way more charitable about this section because it's not out and out, obviously problematic or deeply sort of racist. That the writer just has a certain number of hits and deadlines. Certain number of words they have to hit and deadlines. It's like, yeah, you don't get to have 5 people or 6 amazing people that we have here. 5 people who are going to like brainstorm what the best way to do this. It's one person trying to like get something out to the publisher before it's supposed to get published, right? And so I'm like even more like charitable towards maybe the writing could have been a bit tighter. But it's still good.
The things I'll say, I guess, are 2 things. One is, I think I agree mostly, but I will push back on that it's a sort of optional thing because we are still in the opening 5 core values section, right? And so everything that's in here needs to be treated with a little bit more weight.
Yeah.
To a degree. I think that's worth remembering. The other thing, though, I fully agree that like they probably had a lot less resources because, let's be honest, these books, like the non-standard Forgotten Realm books, are probably treated a little bit less importance internally. Just kind of put them out there to get the work done. Right. And so I don't think this is necessarily like, I'm not like, oh, the creator is awful for messing up the bond of salt. I do think, however, it is still worth discussing the ways you can take this thing from acceptable core idea to a good solid thing, because that's what is useful for this content that we're creating for our audience.
Yeah, that was the point I was gonna bring up, was that I understand that, yeah, like they're not expecting us to, I can understand you're saying they're not expecting us to necessarily take every single story here at face value, but that seems to have been the trend with all the other stories in the other Themes of Sahara sections, including like the really, really awful ones in like the honor killing section, which we all agreed were like super problematic for being there, because they upfront put like sexual assault and those kind of themes as something that players get to participate in. I don't think this is nearly as problematic, and I would say that this section, the bomb assault section, and the following section, Piety, are probably like the least worst of the Themes of Sahara sections. So I'm not like super gonna rag on it or anything. I think it is written really weirdly and framed really weirdly, and it's the fact that they've again chosen to frame it as like the negative first, like how criminals and villains will treat it first rather than like ordinary people is the framing of it. Yeah, I just find it odd.
Fair enough.
I have one more thing, and I do apologize, but this is an important thing that we do need to mention while we're talking about being charitable. I have not read a translation, and I will fully admit I've read translations, and Alibaba only has French and then beyond translations, but I've never read a translation of this story in which Alibaba thinks he must kill the girl as retribution.
Yeah.
Instead, Alibaba's very upset, and then once he figures out what she did, which happens within a sentence, he not only frees her, but suggests that his son marry her. And that part clearly has been edited out. So, like, yes, I do agree that we should be charitable, but I also agree that they have done so much harm already. And even if we don't see it necessarily obviously, they are still putting those sections in there, that our charity should only go so far, because there was no need to suggest that one sentence.
Yeah,
that he should kill the girl's retribution.
I think it's a symptom of like the wider problem with the book that is thrown in so casually.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's the kill first, ask questions later sort of mentality.
Yeah. Anyway,
shall we move on? Unless there's sort of a wrapping thought or something, but if not, then we should.
My wrapping thought is this: I don't like wrapping paper. Just give me the present.
I have to play Burn Bright with you tonight.
Yeah, you do.
I'm sorry.
I think the wrapping thought I will give is like, I think there's, if you are a person listening along and listening to this conversation, and I've also listened to our past episodes, I think notice sort of the difference in, say, this section and the honor section. In the honor section, we had to build our own framework for talking about honor from the ground up, because most of what was there was just feeding into stereotypes, and maybe occasionally hit on real world experiences, like Ahmed sometimes was able to point out, but oftentimes leaned hard into stereotypes and problematic content, especially when we got to say purity, which had just had nothing we could really salvage, and we had to build our own sort of framework for that. Whereas here, we all pretty much agree that the framework, or at least the core ideas of the framework, are solid. And I think that is an important thing when you're looking at settings and trying to build your own or repurpose old settings, is see, where do you need to start from scratch? Where do you need to check out purity and build your own thing instead? And where can you take a framework and fix it up to have something that removes all the harm? And notice how those conversations are different. Notice how those skills are different, because those are useful in different skills.
I believe that I am...
Yeah. Would you like to take up Piety and also read the section?
Yes, I shall place my head on the guillotine. No, I'm being very facetious right now. Piety. Religion is a way of life among people in the land of fate. If it seems that the codes of conduct described so far are pursued religiously, it's because they are. Honor is also a matter of piety, of behaving in the manner deemed good and right by those who rule the heavens, those who will determine whether you are worthy of finding paradise in the afterlife. A dishonorable man, it is said, is never worthy of this great reward. Saharans accept people whose religion are different. In fact, there are a great variety of faiths throughout the land of fate, yet Saharans find it exceedingly difficult to accept anyone who does not believe and pay homage to some power. To believe in other gods may seem strange, but it is not a sin. The sin is in believing in nothing. Major gods recognized throughout Zahara include Old Kor, Learned Zand, Brave Hajama, Najm the Adventurous, Selan the Beautiful Moon, Jisan of the Floods, and Haku of the Desert Winds, and Hakia of the Sea Breezes. None of these gods has a precise portfolio. Instead, each shows strength in a particular ideal or element: wisdom, knowledge, bravery, courage, beauty, bounty, freedom, and honesty. Zaharan deities also include a plethora of lesser gods, local gods, and demigods. Such minor deities may be venerated in one small area, while they are unknown just 10 miles away. All gods, major and minor, answer their worshippers' needs with equal ability. And that is piety.
So this is something we brought up a little while ago, which is the way that they sort of deal with religion in this context. I mean, I, for one, thought that it was good that they didn't just try to like file off the serial numbers from Islam and just say everybody believes in Bislam. And they just kind of did a different thing. And it sounds like they're just continuing the sort of the thing that you get in the sort of main D&D setting, where there's just all sorts of different deities.
So,
your thoughts?
Sorry, Emma.
Oh, I actually, the last passage, I keyed in it because part of my research is sort of in South Asian religions and everything, and that rings very true of Hinduism in general, because you have, of course, major deities and everything, but there's also these things known as village gods, where they're only venerated in one place, and it's a very localized and very personalized deity. And that really stood out to me.
Yeah, thank you. Is it?
So a couple things I want to say, or is you want to go?
Oh no, you spoke before me the first time, so you go ahead.
So the two things, one, yeah, like going off that, I think I don't know whether this is intentional or not, but this does, like, I like the aspect of multiple faiths. It reflects a lot of earlier Islamic and Middle Eastern, either both pre-Islamic and early Islam manifestations, because pre-Islamic there was a bunch of like different local religions, different groups and different tribes and whatnot had different religions. Mecca was a sort of like polytheistic hub that allowed for all sorts of worship. And even in like the early Islamic phase, a lot of the tribes that allied under the banner of Islam didn't always convert, and a bunch of different religions connect. There were a few Jewish tribes, there were a few Christian tribes, and at least a lot of the Islamic mythology in early history shows a deep and accurate knowledge of Christian and Jewish mythology, because it kind of overlaps with a lot of our own stories and histories, because they're, to us, one and the same. But on top of that, like, it also reflects how Islam kind of spread earlier on with the things about the like local deities and gods. A lot of those get reinterpreted as jinn when different cultures convert to Islam. Like, a lot of different indigenous spirits ended up being seen as jinn by those cultures. A lot of different local gods became seen as a form of jinn and a form of different being. So this is cool to me in a way that it reflects that, whether intentionally or not. I will say, though, the one thing that strikes me as odd is Zaharans find it exceedingly difficult to accept anyone who does not believe in and pay some homage to some higher power, because that just feels like a Forgotten Realms thing. Like, gods are provably real. It feels like everyone would, if someone was like, hey, I don't believe in deities, everyone in the Forgotten Realms would look at you like, are you sure? Are you sure?
Healer just visited a week ago. How did you?
How did you? Should we take you to like the nearest temple so that the priest can like summon lightning and then we can solve this problem and go home?
Yeah,
we resurrected you. How do you not possibly? But no, I get that.
It feels like from the Oriental Adventures of like things happen here where it's like exotifying a very normal thing rather than like trying in an attempt to create some unique world building, where it's like, no, I'm fairly certain everyone would look at someone who doesn't believe in gods in the Forgotten Realms with a weird glare. It does feed into sort of like stereotypes that like Arabs and Muslims are particularly hateful of atheists, right? That's the stereotype that's being fed in here, right?
Yeah.
And we can talk about like persecution of atheists in Muslim countries and the like, but we can also talk about that. Like, I've seen some really real shit behavior from like other religious groups towards atheists. Like, it's not it's not inherent to a religion, rather to those who are maintaining power structures and like, and that's a whole complex topic outside the scope of this, but it is feeding into that stereotype.
Yeah, that was that's pretty much what I was going to bring up as well, and also to say that I'm somewhat relieved and surprised, honestly, to see that they're not trying to portray Zaharans as prejudiced towards people of other faiths, because based on what we've seen in the book already, that is what I assumed was going to be said in this section. So I'm pleasantly surprised, and that's why I think this is the least worst section. But I did think it was weird that they put that emphasis on the whole like not being religious thing, because in the world of D&D you can quite literally cast plane shift and go meet your god. But so yeah, it was weird that it was emphasized again, but I'm also, they haven't like gone into languishing detail about how those people would be punished and executed like they have in other sections. So I'm surprised.
I'll be frank, I don't disagree with what anyone else has said. I just also don't know what this is. Why is this here? Like, I get why piety is here. I get why we need to talk about faith. None of the writing is almost so banal as to be non-existent, is what I will say. Ironically enough, following the Bond of Salt, I find this text to be quite bland. Mostly because we haven't really... They introduce a bunch of gods, don't explain them, move right past it. It's more like... Let's reinforce everything we've seen so far as the first passage, and then connect it to faith. And then let's say atheists are not really accepted. Then let's name a bunch of gods. Bye-bye now. I feel like this text could probably use an entire rewrite. And tell me about Old Core. I'm curious about Old Core. I'm curious about Najm and Hakia,
So this was a question I had as someone who is relatively new to D&D and has really only played 5e, whether these gods listed here were something unique to Al-Qadim, or whether they were gods that appeared in other books in older editions of D&D, and like whether that was a thing.
Does somebody know offhand, or should I call our deity Daniel to step in on who seems to have an insight?
Fid just said something.
Oh, sorry.
So these deities are, except Silan, all of them are special about Sahara. Okay. Silan is called Selûne in the rest of the Forgotten Realms. Secondly, I agree about the how it feels. It's not really well put in this section here. The major problem that I see with this setting, like the most biggest problem I can see, is how they overplayed religion in the setting. So religion plays a big part in other places in Faerûn. You have the Forgotten Realms. You have Faerûn with the Baldur's Gate, Waterdeep. There's religion everywhere, and there are a lot of adventures based on religion. But in here, it has been upplayed to the point that it's every person's daily life, in every breath, faith plays a role, which is really ruins a lot of potential for some good role play and good plotting. I understand what they want to achieve. They want to mimic the whole Islamic nation with the how we as Muslims portray Islam in most of our daily aspects. But I don't like it how they upplayed it here.
Yep.
And this is just a byproduct of this theme in the set.
Yeah. So I wonder whether I agree that it's weird that they've just listed these gods and then not explained them if they are mostly something that's unique to this book. But I wonder if there's going to be another section later on that does.
I don't think it's mentioned in this book. I think it's elaborated in another book. Yeah, Land of Fate.
That's a choice.
Two quick things.
Yeah, that's weird then.
So everybody, sorry, I'm just going to interrupt for a second. I'm going to use the facilitators thing. Just say, everybody cool to take a quick break after we finish discussing this section.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully within the next few minutes. Okay, cool. Sorry, please continue on.
I was going to say just like, I think I agree. I think this section doesn't do much. I think this section does have some value in that, like, I think, especially when considering how much this book has been leaning into stereotypes for a lot of it. Having a section that specifically counters some of the stereotypes by saying Zakharans are accepting of all faiths. I think that is an important bit to include. I think that is an important bit to be explicit about especially considering when this book came out, right? Like if we're talking about time, those stereotypes are going to be strong then as well, right? And having a book that says, no, Arabian cultures are accepting of various religions, that is an important thing to have to counter some of the stereotypes. But I do agree, section should do more and has the potential to do a lot of interesting things. You could have dedicated this section to just talking about the different gods, right? Give us a little bit more so that we know
how they're worshipped,
right,
like what their temples might look like, or what their priests might do.
What can we use to roleplay? Because right now, the section, like to go off like what you're saying, Adamali, like it not doing much, it doesn't give you anything to world build. It doesn't give you anything to roleplay. There's nothing in here that you can tangibly take into your game experience.
Frankly, I think it's weird that this section is so short compared to the other ones. I wonder whether it's so short because they were worried about Islam. Like I wonder if they were so scared of tackling that they were just like make up some D&D gods, throw them in there and be done with
Run
it
away.
And run away.
I mean, which is a shame.
I don't think that was an issue at the time.
It feels like they've put far less into this section than other sections, and it's very bland. It's frankly quite boring compared to others, and it could go south very quickly. Like, yes, absolutely it could. But they haven't been afraid of doing that in the other sections, so it is quite odd to me.
It's a shame because any character, like for example, clerics and any other build where it's like you need to have a patron, a divine patron, or something of that sort, or if you want to be biased, you don't know what you're really being biased about. Here's some throwaway names and that's it. And it's like, oh, so I'll just take this god that's in Forgotten Realms and skin it for Zakhara.
I do want to emphasize here that's very much a difference to how I see many of the newer books in 5th edition. Remember, this was for Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, and I'm not saying this to anyone in the panel. This is for the audience. This is for Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. 5th edition is different in some ways. I don't always love 5th edition. I think it's well known that some of us do have problems with it, even persisting to this day. However, I will say this: in 5th edition, whenever they mention a god, they do give them a sentence. And I feel like that could be really beneficial here. Like, I can imagine this in 5th edition, switched around a little bit. Each of these gods gets maybe a sentence or two. Maybe there's some like some water prints. Like, what is that? Water. It's the image that you still put text in front of. Watermarks, yeah. Watermarked images of some of the god symbols. Like, I can see this being so much better, and that's why I'm so disappointed.
Well, I mean, if they did that, they would have to try to explain what the difference between the god that represents bravery is and the god that represents courage is.
But they don't. Well, they did mention they don't have a precise portfolio.
Yeah.
To be fair, the Greeks have 2 gods of war.
Yeah.
More probably. Totally, so
I mean, so the Egyptians had 3 off the top of my head.
I thought it was 4.
Yeah, like exactly like.
But yeah, it's a missed opportunity for world building.
Well, I can explain the difference between all of them. So.
The god of synonyms.
I do also want to mention, pardon me for cutting people off, I do want to mention that many Islamic empires treated people of different religions, depending upon who was in charge, with varying degrees of hospitable nature, or sometimes less hospitable. It was sometimes it was as simple as, well, we pay zakat because we're Muslim, you pay a tax that we're not calling that, which is very reflective of, honestly, a lot of Islamic empires. So there's something I really do appreciate to really camel back what Amr said, because we're bringing that back. It's been a month, but I still remember.
I still remember.
We can't say piggyback because pig is haram.
Yep, it's haram. Not harm, it's haram. English. But to camel back on that, I do have to really say I love the fact that they're appreciative of other. It's totally strange that you believe in this other god of bravery, but cool.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean,
there's something like that. If it was expanded upon, there could be good flavor here. I'm not mad. I'm just disappointed.
The two things I will say are real quick.
Go ahead.
Ahmed, you can go.
No, go ahead.
So really quick. One is to kind of come back off of something that Emily was saying. This is AD&D, and I think that's worth keeping in mind what the core loops of play were. Like the core loops of play for AD&D and OSR and things like that. At the time, some groups definitely still did heavy RP stuff, but it was more closer still to like the wargaming groups, right? And so knowing more about the specifics of the deity mattered less than knowing what spells they gave you access to and things like that. And that's kind of reflective of the book. I think that's worth keeping in mind. It does suck. I wish there was more, and I think it is highlighted more in the context of this being a non-European setting and the gods not being explained. I think that's worth keeping in mind. The second thing I would say as well is there's also a bit more to Piety. Like the faith in the Lawgiver is technically part of Piety. So maybe we'll get something interesting when we come back from the break there. But Ahmed, do you want to say something?
First of all, this book is not intended to be a complete campaign book. This is simply do you want to have Arabian Adventures in Forgotten Realms? Do you need a place? Here it goes. There are some things you can use and some ideas here and there. So this is why a lot of things were not elaborated, because honestly, they have no idea if this is going to work or not. Secondly, they did in other books expand on these gods and the culture and other things. They did put some good descriptions some places they didn't. So there's really no they did a good job or bad job in this aspect. Like it varies it varies so much, but it's less problematic than this book.
Yeah, this is the least problematic, but by virtue of
though I will go back to something that Ahmed mentioned, and then I think I may have to insist on that break we were going to take, and we can continue this discussion afterwards too, of course. But I wanted to underline the point that Ahmed made here, which was basically this is again, coming from that Orientalist framework, right? There's the Occident, and then there's the Orient. There's the secular Occident, and there's a religious Orient and fundamentalist Orient, and of course that's kind of what this is touching on, which is why all of the people in Al-Qadim, like whatever god they follow, they definitely follow a god, and they're more religious than the people of the Forgotten Realms, which is basically mythical Middle Ages Europe. But even then, it's not insisted there, if I recall correctly, in the Forgotten Realms that you have to, everybody follows a god, even though that religiosity is very, very common throughout human history until very recently. So anyway, the sort of the framework, the overarching framework there is, I think, the more problematic part of it than the content of it specifically.
Absolutely, yeah.
I've been enjoying this so far. We're not crying yet.
Like I said, it's the least worst part of this.
But let's take a break and give everybody a chance to hit the head or grab
my tissues,
water or something, or some chai. Tub. We'll be back in 5 minutes. The next section, if you could take it away, please, Ammar.
Yeah, let's talk about fate and the Lawgiver. Despite the variety of gods that are worshipped by Zakharans, one belief transcends all others, the belief in fate. Every Zakharan knows her power. Who is this creature after which an entire land is named? Not even the genies can agree. A few Zakharans believe she is the mother of the gods, though she herself is not a goddess, for she grants no spells and calls for no one to worship her. To others, she is simply a pervasive elemental force who can be as vast as the heavens. It can assume a form as small as an ordinary woman, or as insubstantial as a whisper. It was as the shadow of a woman that fate is said to have appeared in ancient times, to share her wisdom with the genies, gods, and men. When her visit was complete, she had left her teachings in the hands of a beautiful girl, over whom all the gods and genies had been fighting. The girl recorded fate's teachings upon a series of scrolls. The story of this girl, who became the Lawgiver, survived for centuries in legends told by the Rauns, desert bards. Then, just 500 years ago, the scrolls were discovered. The customs that wise men have always espoused as good, the code of honorable behavior, were laid out in manner that was so clear, so complete, that all immediately knew its wisdom. Soon, all Zakharans embraced these ideals, and Zakhara became known as the land of fate. Okay.
Reflections.
So we got a creation myth here.
Kind of, yeah. It seems like people were already walking about, but like a sort of creation of Zahara the culture.
it's the equivalent of sort of the Iliad, which serves as a creation myth for Greece as a country, rather than like as Greek people, right? Like because the Iliad sort of tells the story of how Greece came to be. This tells the story of how the land of fate came to be in a similar way.
I think, despite the fact this is short, there's quite a lot to talk about here.
Yeah.
Or George Washington as the creation myth for America.
Basically, yeah.
So,
Well,
Sorry,
welcome
like,
to our
there's a
final
real
stream.
person, but then it's heavily mythologized, right?
Yeah.
Sir John A. McDonald.
Like there's
here.
it's when I talk about mythologized, I mean the difference between, you know, lions as kings of the savannah and brave creatures versus actual smelly lions who are actually more like scavengers, right?
Yeah.
Well, it's the lionesses who do all the work, really.
Of course.
Okay.
So I do think there is something interesting here, but I think it's betrayed by the sections that came before. So I imagine that they made the lawgiver female to tie this theme into the story of Scheherazade, maybe, and on its own, the idea that this force is female could be cool, because that's like a very powerful sort of thing in this setting. But I have a big issue with this in the context of everything we've just read, because they really want us to believe that the themes of Sahara that we've just read through, 18 pages of describing how cruel this world is to women, were written by a woman, because I don't believe for a single moment that any woman would have willingly written or believed this. And it feels very skeevy to reveal that a woman is sort of the originator of this. After going into huge detail. Yeah, they're like justifying their own internal sexism after going into huge detail about how mistreated women are in ways that are like outright harmful, potentially even triggering for some people to read. And then, they're like trying to justify it to themselves. And I have a huge issue with that.
So I'm wondering, relatedly, whether this comes from the concept of Fortuna, the Roman religious version of luck. So Lady Fortuna is a Roman goddess who represents fate to some degree, fortune and luck. So I don't know if this was, well, we're going to throw in a deity that's a woman and we're going to have some hashtag representation that way, or if it was, well, we'll just take existing goddess that I already know about and file off the serial numbers to get a call her.
Oh yeah, I'm not assuming that they did it for a good reason at all.
And I mean, the writer
in the desert.
I'd imagine
shed
the writer
some
was
light on
familiar with
this.
the concept of Fortuna. Please.
Yeah.
The concept of fate is that the Arabs did not believe in gods at all before the Abrahamic religion that came. They reached the conclusion that there's probably some creator out there, but they did not worship, did not anything. To them, there is only one true power, which is time, ad-dahr. And it can be like it can be another concept to eventuality, fate. So this is one thing. Another thing is, this is the absolute power. There's nothing greater than that. So the gods came after that. So I think this is where they came with this idea from. My brain just scattered for a minute, so I apologize for that.
No, I think that's really interesting that that's where it comes from. I want to be excited that is sort of the ultimate force in this world, in this setting. But given everything that's come before it, it just feels so skeevy and like they're trying to justify themselves.
There's also, I know it's weird to focus on one sentence, but I think everyone knows about me right now that I pick one sentence and I hyperfixate on for 2 hours, and that's this entire stream from my point of view. But like the last sentence, in all seriousness, soon all Zaharans embraced these ideals and Zahara became known as the land of fate. Because let's talk about that for a second. That's not realistic. Even, hold up, wait. Ignoring the fact that she's a woman it's a woman who's the lawgiver. The fact is, there's never been a point in history in any place on any planet that we know of where someone saw customs laid out for them in front of deserts, in the version of Desert Scrolls or Cave Scrolls or Dead Sea Scrolls, and immediately said, yes, this is factually accurate. We all believe this now. And I find it very weird that Zahara has been stated as a diverse populace, not just in terms of species. I'm using that instead of race here. Not only in terms of species and beliefs and religion, but specifically, they've gone out of their way to make two whole cultures within Zahara itself, the Al-Badia and the Al-Hudud. Isn't it? I always forget the second. Thank you, Hadar. They've gone out of their way to specify that there are two completely different cultures in this one place called Zahara. And there are multiple cities, all of whom have a different leader. In a world full of diversity, why is there no diversity of thought?
It's a fundamental misunderstanding of how culture works.
Yeah.
Well, it's
Basically.
oxymoronic. Like,
Yeah.
it's completely oxymoronic, this entire chapter,
Mhm.
which keeps saying, here's this diversity, here's this whatever, but I'm only going to focus on these two big groups, and everyone belongs in one of these two groups.
And they all
or
believe the same
everyone
thing anyway.
believes. Yeah, and
Yeah.
they all do the same thing anyway, and it's like we've been saying in every single subsection, it's like, here are these very specific rules, but nobody really follows them to the letter anyway, so, you know.
Beyond
Yeah.
that, though, I do want to connect this to some of our previous works here on this channel. Hello, Asians Represent. Specifically, stuff we've talked about during Karatur and stuff we have talked about for Legends of the Five Rings and Rokugan, in which there is a set strata by which all people follow in these countries, which is a distinct... it exists in opposition to a lot of the Western-built settings. I've stated this example in multiple episodes before, so I'm sorry for repeating it here, but you cannot make a Robin Hood in this game. In this setting, Robin Hood does not make sense, whereas fundamentally, he's a dude who goes around stealing from rich people and giving it to poor people. Making that here would require you to start flouting various traditions and to start considering how that would affect your characters as a Haran to like a large degree. It wouldn't make sense because all people observe the exact same rules because there is a sort of codified strata by which all these people live. It is extraordinarily Orientalist. It is Orientalist in the exact same way Karatur was, and Orientalist in the exact same way Rokugan is, I would argue, despite the fact I've not been on that stream. People have seen my opinions. I put them on Twitter. Follow me, @WerewolfFeels. Enough of the plug. My point is, I feel like this chapter is meant to like give us some more world building and then wrap it all up, all of these themes up. And in a sense, it does that. But it does it by falling upon the worst stereotypes in it. In that it suggests that all these people, these diverse people, believe very specifically in these very few things. Mm-hmm. And I get the fact that this is a setting book and it's only one out of many for the Al-Qadim books, because back in the day, they would always make multiple books for a setting. It wasn't just
pamphlets, right?
Yeah. However, this is how we're being introduced to the setting, and we've gone out of our way here. Out of our way. We're not just introducing big themes. We've gone out of our way to say everyone follows these themes. We've had that sentence repeated towards us. That's not just dangerous from an Orientalist perspective. It's also really annoying from a world-building perspective. Mm. And I find, if there's one weak thing I can say about what little we've read of Zahara so far, it's that they have this objective need to reinforce things in the weirdest, sometimes most dangerous ways possible. Like I said, sometimes I focus on a sentence and talk about it for 2 hours. Sorry.
Yeah, no, thank you for those thoughts.
I'd like to follow up on that.
Sure.
So I do agree, like so far in this book, there is a lot of things that needs to be just thrown out of the window. No questions asked. However, it's not all that bad. What you see as, oh, they're fixed as with certain rules, this is basically Islam. We have Muslims all over the world. They have extremely unique cultures, but they still follow similar rules. So having a set of rules that everybody agrees on or believes in does not contradict culture. So whether or not, I think maybe they should have added more, which they did in later books in the world building. But the concept is that this is kind of a simulacrum of Islam. So they have these set of rules, their set of expectations that everybody think, oh, this is the way.
I agree with what you're coming from, Ahmed, but I disagree on some of it. In that I am Muslim, just like I think a lot of people here are. But I don't agree that we all have a set of rules that we follow. Even when it comes to the pillars of Islam, the number of pillars you follow may be as few as 5 and as big as 13, depending upon the sect you come from.
Yeah.
Right?
Or none.
Or none, right? Depending upon whether you're a Hadithist or a Quranist. And we haven't even gone into like the actual sects yet. There are huge differences. We agree that there are rules. We don't always agree on what they are. And I do think whenever I hear the term Zaharan pillars, and again, I've mentioned this one before, Zaharan themes, dear God, I just did it. I'm like, I immediately default to pillars because I'm Muslim and we have pillars. And part of me thinks, yeah, they drew this from the Islamic pillars. They drew the existence of these themes from those pillars. However, I think that final sentence really does illustrate just how further they went than most people agree that these are, the pillars. In that in only 500 years, these customs that a few wise men spoke about suddenly became not only the law of the land, but the source of its very name. When in reality, Islam is a bit older than that. A lot more people disagree, and that disagreement started even before Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him's death. And that very few people, Muslims don't spring out of thin air, right? We've had disagreements from the dawn of time, and more importantly, we've had disagreements where some of us are Muslim and some of us are not in the same country. In fact, a lot of people could argue that's how Islam was founded. So, I do agree with what you're saying, Ahmed. I just disagree that it was. I think it's a misunderstanding of Islam, what they took from to develop this.
That point, I can absolutely agree with you.
Yeah, and I feel it's, as a Muslim, in the book, in a country very next door to the country in which this was written, and who was born around the same time, to be honest. I feel like it's misunderstandings like this that cause people to think that the actions of a few can be attributed to the many. And I think that's where my tension is coming from and my fear. Even though I'm not actually fearful of people who read this book or even like it. I'm not. I'm sorry if you want me to be afraid of you. I have other things to be afraid of. But when I see sentences like that, soon all Zahatans embrace this, I get worried. Because that sort of belief that there is a single unifying thought has led to actual damage to people, like me, to myself, and to the people I care about. But yeah, I think that there is a version of this that makes sense.
To weigh in from a historical perspective for a second, because I agree that kind of to a degree both points Adam, you're 100% right, and Ahmed, you're also right. We're at a point where a lot of the core kind of beliefs of Islam for everyone who is Muslim tend to around the same core values for the most part. Obviously, there are extreme sects on who emphasize or de-emphasize certain beliefs, but the core values of Islam. But it doesn't. I think that the point for me is it's also an ahistorical view of how religions and beliefs spread, right? You don't see a scroll and everyone follows it. It's even if you're looking at just Islam, it was a very complicated and long history for it to reach the point that it was, and for it to be even as ubiquitous in just the Middle East, right? Sayyidina Muhammad's life involved a lot of war, involved a lot of conflict, involved a lot of fighting people who tried to kill him for those beliefs, right? It wasn't just he showed up with the Quran and because of its beautiful poetry, everyone followed it. And I think that is a point as well, that to kind of go off what Emily was saying about it creating a sort of dangerous one-minded culture, or single collective-minded culture, rather than showing that people, or showing how these sorts of beliefs would historically spread.
And it could have been easily avoided, in my mind, just not by including sentences like, soon all Zahatans embrace these ideals. And no matter who you are, peasant or pauper, they all believe in these core values. Not even suggesting that people believe in things outside of them, but just getting rid of those specific sentences would have eliminated this weirdly all-informing sort of point of view, and just make it these are the most common things instead of these are the only things.
So you, I think that the better way to write it is to have a descriptive of that majority, but not all. This is a common theme. I think this is the issue that we're mostly disputing here, is that everybody, which doesn't make sense. But what they should have wrote is that most people are expected or thought to be following these ideals.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
It's also, I agree that there's like harm, like genuinely, this is a harmful thing to be written in here. And then from the perspective of, again, this being a game, it's limiting, again, which this entire section is, because what if you want to create a character who doesn't believe that? Well, then they're probably going to be hunted down and killed for it, or
they will be prosecuted and killed. And
yeah, or you literally can't. So you're limiting what your players get to do constantly in this section.
And I know enough GMs who take these published books as literally like rules and gospel and whatever you have it. And yeah, it's...
So we've already, we've started somewhat naturally, I guess, discussing our sort of overall reflections on this piece, but I want to underline something. We did it!
Yeah.
We got through chapter 1. It took us 6 months.
There's a couple more things I would like to say about this paragraph before we like do a chapter 1 retrospective.
Please go ahead. Yeah.
So like in the chat, so I want to talk a bit about the like fate being specifically defined as not a deity, because I thought that was really interesting, as like giving us a sort of strong definition of what a deity is in D&D, and that is someone who fits the definition of someone who could be a cleric's patron, basically, right? That's the definition they give us. You have to be able to be a patron for a cleric or a paladin, which are both also, we were kind of talking about this in our break, but like very Western-centric words, cleric and paladin. But those are the ones using D&D, so we'll use those. But like, and someone in the chat pointed out that there's one god who kind of doesn't fit this already in Forgotten Realms called Ao, I believe, the hidden one. Who is Ao? It's just Ao. Okay, yeah, fair enough. Ao is an overgod. And so in a similar way to the way, like I was looking at the wiki because I did some quick research when that was brought up, and a lot of folks, it seems, are pointing like a lot of Ao is the only confirmed overgod that we know, though a lot of people hypothesize that Fate, Mystica, the mother deity of the Mystican pantheon, and are both overgods because of the way they're described. And I think and both all three are similarly deities who do not grant spells or powers to their followers, sort of transcend alignment as a concept and just exist in a space above the gods. I think that's a neat concept that, like, not talking about like the specific implementation Mystica, obviously, because I don't know much about it and probably got some problems, but like I think that's a neat concept to have this sort of like pre-creator deity, like in Greek mythology, that's chaos, right? In Egyptian mythology, that's depends which version of Egyptian mythology you're looking at, but like
Greek as well.
Jebel could be the Ogdoad, could be Apep and Ra to a degree, but like having this sort of being, this entity that is above gods. Ma'at is another one that it often could be in Egyptian mythology. So like there's a lot of different basis for that culturally, and I think that's a cool concept to have and to have centered personally.
I wish, that makes me really wish that Fate was also given the title over God.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they kind of suggest that, right? Is that she's the mother of the gods, though she is herself not a god, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
I wish I could be excited about this concept, because in and of itself, I think it's very interesting. Like I'm super into the idea of, you know, primordial chaos in Greek mythology and stuff like that. But just given where it sits and the stuff that's come before it, I am sadly not able to be interested.
No,
in
I get that.
It has potential, though. It has potential.
The potential. Adam Lee.
I'm so sorry. I'm working on a slight delay, of course, in which my brain is the delay. My computer's fine. It's just my brain.
Okay.
I do think while we're talking about sexism, then we should point to the story of the lawgiver. When her visit was complete, i.e. Fate's, she had left her teachings in the hands of a beautiful girl over whom all the gods and genies had been fighting. Yeah, that's pretty... It's sexist. It's
So
real
remember when I was saying
sexist.
that this is just the Iliad? That's Helen of Troy.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Like this is the Iliad, and this is Helen of Troy.
Sure. No, I don't disagree.
I'm not saying that's a good thing, mind you. I'm not saying it's a good. I'm just,
Poor
I
Helen
mean,
of Troy.
Helen of Troy was just an object over here. It's like, here, take these important scrolls. Be my prophet.
Yeah, she's a weird combination of Helen and a little bit of Muhammad, peace be upon him, I guess. Which is weird. That's a choice.
We've got just a few minutes left. I do want to give us some space to do an overall retrospective and reflection on the chapter here. So does somebody want to jump in first? Shall we continue in sort of our initiative order clockwise around the screen? Isa, if you're
yeah, if that helps us keep time, sure, I'm happy to. So yeah, I think we wanted to do sort of like a thinking back on this entire section and like summarizing our thoughts on it overall. And I think, yeah, looking back on the themes of Zahara as a whole, the section here is placed at the front of the book to set up the world that we as players should be getting excited to explore before we delve into creating characters, which is the next section. And after reading this section, I am not excited. I am frankly exhausted and repelled from playing this setting. We've discussed the like extreme sexism and racism in a lot of detail, so I don't feel the need to reiterate it again here. You can go back and watch the previous streams if you want to hear our detailed thoughts on that. But yeah, it's very bad. But even if you somehow manage to ignore like the horrible sexist and racist stuff, I have to ask, like, what are you really left with here other than something that's honestly mostly pretty dull and unenticing, and thinking as a player like actively limits what I can do creatively when I'm making my character or my backstory or GM's creating quests to such an extreme. And it doesn't really do anything to make this feel like a fantasy setting that's exciting to engage with. Like, I think it rests on easy, predictable stereotypes. It also recycles real world stories without even really like adapting them to fit into a fantasy setting. And what I feel like that says is, whether consciously or subconsciously, and I want to assume it's the subconsciously, the people who wrote this think that Arab or Asian countries and people are exotic, different and strange enough to exist in a fantasy setting without them having to do the work of adaptation and extrapolation to change it to something that's fantastical. So they think they can just take what they think we're like, based on, you know, Hollywood movies made by white people, as they themselves admitted in the opening paragraph of the book, just take that whole cloth and stick it into a D&D setting and call it Arabian fantasy, which in my opinion makes Al-Qadim inherently othering and Orientalist, like in and of itself from the outset, and I think is really the root of probably all the issues with this book so far. Like all the sexism and the racism and the Islamophobia, I think stems from that need they seem to have had to just like place it in the other immediately. And I think that's where it all comes from for me.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was very well put. Adam Ali, your reflections? You weren't there from the beginning, but you joined early on enough that I think you got to have some.
Episode 2. So I would argue that if you were to remove all the sexism, racism, xenophobia, Islamophobia, atheistism, sure. If you were to remove all of that, what you're really left with is a map, a thimbleful of salt, and the concept of fate, which is not really enough to build a setting off of. Going back to what I talked about in the beginning, you know, is this playable? For the first paragraph? No. There's not enough here to play with, in my mind, to make a fun, gameable, you know, system through. I think it can be rewritten to do that, but we're not seeing it. Beyond that, this was made in a different time, right? Does that excuse the harm in here? Not really. Although 9/11 not yet happened, there was already some stereotypes about Arabs, specifically Arabs, outside of the very wide brush that eventually all brown people would get, that they were very dogmatic, very closed off, and, well, extremely harmful at times. Like, there was already the stereotypes beginning to be expressed. And this kind of feeds into that. This comes from that mindset. The people who wrote this, and I think this is true of many AD&D settings, so it's not exclusive to Al-Qadim, the people of this mindset didn't feel the need to look beyond their own presumptions. And I would argue that was a feature of much of the writing of many earlier editions. I do not really hold it against them because it was the pervading thought. However, it does not excuse the harm this thing is built into it right from the get-go. I would finish with this after reading the section thoroughly with all of you. If it weren't for the fact that I'm on this saying hi, I don't know if I'd want to play this at all. Because when Al-Qadim was built, it was sold as sort of like a mythical trip with genies and magic and carpets. And so far, all I'm getting is racism, sexism, xenophobia, and being alone with my tissue box in the bathtub after every single episode. But it's not really giving me what I wanted from the system, which is why I'm super excited to get to characters. I hope that will change. But this is still the first paragraph. And the first paragraph says a lot. It is the first paragraph, first chapter. Good Lord, you understand me. This is the first chapter. The first chapter says a lot. It is the first chapter I read before I really am going to decide, in the game shop, if I'm going to buy this bloody book to begin with. And for a lot of people in my position, I would see us all putting that book back on the shelf and walking away. And that is not good when you're building something like this. Because fundamentally, and this is my final sentence, this book was not made for the people whose traditions and cultures it is drawn from. It wasn't meant to welcome us to the table. It wasn't meant to make us feel like we are welcome at all. It was made to our exclusion with the presumption that we would never be interested in sitting down to begin with. And I feel hurt by that on a personal level.
I'm sorry.
Oh, it's okay. It's fine. That's the whole point of this is talk about, about our feelings. And I feel like I would do everyone disservice to state that my hurt isn't a bit personal. Yeah, it is. Of course. I'm not entirely academic. I'm pretty academic. Not entirely. I'm a human being. This does hurt me.
How are you doing? How do you feel about the movie?
So I think echoing a lot of what has already been said, and I would add, I think take a step back and look at what would have happened if I encountered this book in the wild, right? If I wasn't coming here to read it, critical read, if I was coming as a kid playing D&D and I find this book and I start reading it. And there's two things that could happen, I could see happening. One, I read it, I get some degree of length into the first chapter, and if honor doesn't stop me, which it probably will, the purity would definitely have stopped me, and I put it down. The other option is I see it, and I read it and internalize or just accept it as normal and move on. And both those outcomes are bad, right? One is exposing me to racist context and putting me off of D&D and potentially TTRPGs forever. The other is having me internalize a lot of harmful things as normal. And I think that's the big thing to keep in mind when talking about this. Part of it is you can make better settings, right? We've talked about how this is just not fun or interesting so far. I'm sure we'll get to cool mechanics eventually, but the stuff here is just not interesting world building for the most part. And you can just build better words. Y'all can go into your tables and create cool stories, and we want to help you do that. We want to help you tell cool stories with Middle Eastern and Arabian and Islamic and South Asian and everything inspired elements, because there are a lot of cool stuff in our cultures, right? There's a lot of cool stuff there, and we want you to enjoy it the same way we can enjoy it, and that's why we're doing this. But also, even without that, this product as it exists is harmful. I know that there are people who will argue, oh, it's a book, it can't harm you if you don't look at it. The problem is the book might not harm me because I can stop looking at it, but it doesn't mean the next person who stumbles upon it won't be harmed. It doesn't mean that content is still not being profited on by folks. And that is why these are important conversations to have. Is why books are worth evaluating. It is why TTRPG products, even if TTRPG products are incomplete to a degree, until the story is brought to reality at the table, they can still cause harm in their stationary form, and they can still bring joy, and they can still cause good things. Like, we still all laughed at the joke about that it was in parentheses in the Alibaba story about everyone lived happily ever after except for the thief. That was funny. Your books can bring you happy things, and books based on our cultures can and should make you feel happy. And that's, I think, at least one of my goals for doing this. And I hope we find some more cool stuff going forward that can be turned into something worth talking about and playing.
And thank you for raising that point. I know that as something of a third culture kid, I've struggled with identity and my place in the world, and especially in sort of in Canada, which I now call home, for a long time. And if this had come to me at a point where my identity was more sort of shifting and didn't quite know who I was, this would be very challenging, like really screw me up. Thank you for putting that so eloquently as well. Mariam, thoughts on the first chapter thus far? Or the book thus far, with the first chapter having finished?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a long, 5 or 6 months on these couple of pages. But to build up a little bit on what Ammar said is that, yeah, we can certainly dismiss it and put it away and never deal with it. But the thing is that for a lot of people, especially a lot of people that this book is made for, which isn't us, this is their first exposure to a culture that is unknown to them. And if this is their takeaway from it, it's harmful because it gives them this unearned confidence that they know what they're talking about and they know this culture, whereas they don't. And in that sense, especially as GMs and leader, like, you're essentially running a game, you kind of educate a lot of the things that it's like, no, it's done this way. And kind of talking over people whose cultures it actually comes from. And that happens not just in gaming, it happens in many other spheres where, for example, like in archaeology, and I'm sure you can back me up on this, is that they will act as experts of history and culture of that thing because they've studied in it from books that were written by them with their perspective rather than the actual cultures they're talking about. And it's important to kind of like realize, yes, it's a game, but it's the same thing. It's the same concept.
Emma, I hate that we've shortchanged you a little bit, but you do have a few minutes. But I definitely want to get your perspective for two reasons. One, you've been in touch with the author. Two, you kind of want to run this. So please, reflections on.
I don't need to talk again about the problems that this book or the whole series, the whole campaign has. It has a lot of problems, and we touched on the major ones in this book so far. I do believe it has potential. That the people working on it, they were not thinking, oh, how do we do it negatively? They were trying to find things that they enjoyed. They wanted to reproduce it for others to enjoy without thinking about any malice. So this has been my approach in this. And I have been reading through the books and trying to recompile it and rewrite a lot of things because it needs rewriting. But having problems doesn't mean there's no potential in it. Like, it's like having a bad kid and just giving up on them. I really have high hopes on this setting. And like we saw in the concept of fate, we saw in the bond of salt, and very few other things in this book that were found later much better and much clearer details in the other ones. There's so much good in it. It just needs to be reworked. Like, whatever they were thinking back then, they tried their best, and by today's standard, it was horrible. But this is what they had in their hands. They did not have the internet that we had today. They did not have the connectivity that we had today. Most Arab countries were literally isolated. We don't mix with others so well back in the 80s and 90s. And let's not go talk about the wars that are going on everywhere. But now they have an opportunity to take all these things and update it in a proper way into 5e, in a way that we Arabs we actually enjoy. I have a player in my setting right now. He's playing as a Kharan wizard. So I want to give him as much as I can, but most of the stuff in Zahara is not yet usable for us. I need to rework so much on it. Like, even with the potential, I still need to fix it. So this should not be on me. Should be on them to upgrade it and fix it. It's like the folks here in Agents Represent said many times, it's not enough just to put the label on it. Like, I want to use Zahara. I want to have my players enjoy the setting, but I want them, Wizards of the Coast, to take responsibility of these issues and upgrade it, fix it up. Don't just leave it on us. Don't leave it on the DM. Not every DM would pick up on these issues and try to fix them. And the people who I met through D&D, a lot of them approached me because they were introduced to D&D through Zahara. And this gave us a lot of connectivity. They realized there is issues and they just threw them out. So why are they still there? We just need them out and rewritten properly. They have the resources, they have everything. And I'm sure there are a lot of people who want to go in a less Western setting now.
Mm-hmm. Oh, thank you very much.
One last thing. I am doing a separate stream on my 20 Arabia RPG with my friend Safiya. So we're not criticizing, we're not going in such depth that we're doing here. We're simply, okay, this is what we have, this is how we'll use it, and moving on. So if this is something anyone is interested in, I hope that you come join us in the next stream.
Well, that's perfect as a segue to the next bit, which is where can we all find you? And if you'd like to let the wonderful folks who are watching and are listening know what other projects that you're working on, where they can find you. I guess we'll start at the top again. And Isa, if you wouldn't mind.
Hey. So yeah, you can find me at Evil Clever Dog on Twitter and Instagram. You can also find me at youtube.com/evilcleverdog, where I'm now making some cool cosplay and crafting videos. I just did a project working with Bethesda UK, so like cool official sponsored content, yay. So please go and check it out. I'm really happy with it, and there'll be more coming soon. I'm doing a video about my Miss Marvel cosplay, so yes. And you can also find me on some various streams. In fact, later today / tonight, depending on what country you're in, you can find me and Adam Ali on the Trio Bright on Chromatic Chimera. That's at 11 p.m. GMT, 6 p.m. EST, I think is the correct one. And then also on Monday, you can find me at 11:30 p.m. GMT, 6:30 p.m. EST on Quest the Soaring City, also on Chromatic Chimera. So yeah, please do come and check that stuff out.
Very cool. Adam Ali, would you like to do next one? I think you may have to unmute yourself.
Hi, my name is Adam Ali, and you can find me online at Werewolf Feels on Twitter. You'll find any published works that I happen to be a part of under the pen name, which is a combination of family names, Nurdin Ali Kadir. I'm happy to announce that I've written for Jiangxi, Blood on the Banquet Hall, and I've also written for a mnemonic RPG. You can also find me on the Trio Bright this evening, 6 p.m. EST, yes, you're right, on Chromatic Chimera. And you'll also be able to find me on Off the Table every other Wednesday. The next episode is December the 2nd, on the Burn Bunch, a Monster of the Week campaign, which is entering our penultimate episode, I believe. Otherwise, you'll see me smattered around. As a reminder, I'll be streaming with Mariam. We'll both be playing a game of Quest, led by Diana, aka Super Dylan, on Sunday at around 4 p.m. Eastern, if I'm remembering the times correctly. And above all, you can find me here on Asians Represent, talking about Al-Qadim and other books, and always ready to remind folks that at the end of the day, these are books. If it's important for you to turn off the phone, turn off the Twitch stream, turn it off, go get a drink. You deserve it.
Ammar?
Hey, everyone. You can find me everywhere on the internet at Amaraz. I do stuff like this. I do writing. I do podcasting. I do streaming. Tomorrow at 2 EST, I believe. But for pretty much all day on the Arvin Elron channel, Brandon O'Brien is going to be running and playing a bunch of games to help fundraise for more of their streams, one of which I'm a part of. And tomorrow I'll be playing in a game of Tales from the Loop, which is going to be a lot of fun. I'm very excited for that. There's also some other fun games, including one from the Micro RPG book and a game of, I keep forgetting the name, but I can pull it up in 2 seconds. Negocias Infernales. So if any of those sound cool, go check that out. It'll be a full day of streams with an awesome cast and majority, if not all, BIMPOC for most of the day. So it's a good time. Yeah, that's the main thing. I do writing. I'm on other appearances. Check out my Twitter to kind of keep up to date. I retweet stuff when I'm on it. Yeah, that's all I got for now.
Fantastic. Definitely give them a follow. Mariam, please.
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter at media_junkie. I am a podcaster, streamer, general TTRPG content creator. You can see me on Utopia, which is a channel I am a caretaker of. And next week, that is Wednesday, November 25th, is our season finale of Kahania, which is a Surzamine, a South Asian fantasy setting that I'm writing. Show, actual play show, and it's going to be interesting. There's going to be some weddings crashed, which is kind of my brand, weddings and crashing them. In addition, I am also a part of FCRD, which is Fuck Cancer, Roll Dice, event that is happening November 26th to the 29th. I am running a game of Dialect on November 26th, Thursday, at 4 p.m., which is a fun diceless, GM-less game of language. And then, like Anna-Malie had mentioned, I will be playing in a quest game on November 29th at 4 p.m. And if you want to follow all the things I'm doing, you can just check me out on Twitter. That's me.
Wonderful. Thank you. Definitely give them a follow as well. Ahmed, where can people find you and what are you working on these days?
Hi, I'm Ahmed Al-Jabri, and you'll find me at Mr_Al-Jabri on everywhere, especially on Twitter. I'm also running the 20 Arabia RPG community and the Twitch and YouTube. Right now, I am trying to read through the other books of the Khara and trying to salvage whatever we can salvage. And you'll find me on 20 Arabia RPG with my friend Sophia, discussing and going through the books one by one.
That's fantastic. My name is Ammar. You can find me at Ammar Ijaz on Twitter, which you can also catch just underneath the display here. I am one of the co-hosts of Asians Represent. We just dropped a new episode about wuxia, so definitely give that a listen on the podcast. We're also working on we're currently editing, and hopefully by the time this is in replay, we will have the latest episode of Dungeons and Asians, which is our sort of fantasy actual play that is set in a custom setting inspired by China, DM'd of course by the wonderful Daniel Kwan, who is also the producer here, which is absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for taking care of this, so we can focus on the kind of criticism and the conversation that we like to have, commentary on this stuff, Daniel. You can catch previous episodes of, including this one in VOD. Afterwards, you can catch previous episodes of this stream, as well as the Asians Read, critical read of Oriental Adventures, another D&D setting, as well as Kartur. On YouTube, at our channel, you can just search for Asians Represent or Critical Read to find the previous episodes. And we will also be doing this next month on the third Saturday of the month at 12 ET, so Eastern, it would be Standard Time again. So you can catch us back here getting into chapter 2, where we talk about actual character creation, and I'm sure there'll be lots of interesting things to say about the mechanics and how they support or don't support the setting and the sort of flavor that has already been discussed. Thank you so much for watching, and see you next month.